that has been given to us about the work they did. The book is excellent, and we warmly receive it. And we must insist that what is in the book actually confirms it exposes how imperialism works. It is unacceptable that in this day and age, over $50 billion a year is being siphoned from Africa illegally, which means without paying taxes. 75% of Africa's exports are in raw materials, and only 14% are in manufactured goods. It is equally disturbing that inter-African trade is only at 10 and up to 12% because of obstacles placed on us by the donor countries or former colonial masters. They ensure that it is cheaper for African states to export to Europe and the Americas rather than among ourselves, because they will ensure that we don't develop value addition and beneficiation of our products. The problem is that in this day and age, up to all African resources are still largely owned or controlled by Western multinational corporations. The foreign companies and investors are involved in massive and continuous profit shifting, trade mispricing, and making falsified invoices with their parent companies and others. They hide their true revenues so as to avoid paying taxes in the countries of their operations. They bribe as many Africans and in senior positions as possible, and this makes them, the bribed Africans, to cooperate with imperialists and become super rich overnight at the expense of their own people and countries. The oppression and exploitation of Africa by foreigners and some capitalistic members of the ruling elites in our countries also include organized crime, smuggling, outrageous scandals.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Fenyo Butali from Botswana.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me start by paying tribute to His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, one of the finest sons of this continent, and we thank him for his continued engagement in this journey of trying to better our continent. Yesterday I spoke very briefly about what I believe is the route, what I believe is the way that we as Africans, we as the current crop of members of the Pan-African Parliament should go. I posited here that charity begins at home. I said that we need, first of all, to look at ourselves in this house and ask ourselves whether, as we preach peace and security, do we campaign, do we encourage democratic reforms in our own countries. I want to say the same today, that as we speak about illicit financial flows, we should know that the very governments that we represent, the very parties that we represent, are active players in this thing. We have let our peoples down because when in our countries, when activists talk about access to information laws that will ensure transparency, that will ensure accountability, we shoot them down, because we don't want our citizens to have access to the information, because they will ask relevant questions about how money is used, how resources are are being allocated. We do not want such transparency. We do not want such accountability. I wanted also to say that we should know that secrecy is corrosive. Illicit flows is just one of the many ills that are as a result of the way we govern our countries. We talk about tax evasion, that multinationals evade tax, but we are at the center because we do not want to capacitate our people, our professionals, to be able to protect the interest of our people. I wanted also to say there are laws such as declaration of assets that will ensure that those in power, those in office, we know what they have, and we ensure that they do not become rich overnight. But as countries, we do not enact such laws because we want to hide in the secrecy. Because in the secrecy, we are able to continue to defraud, we continue to deprive our people of the resources that are God-given. I want to say, as I conclude, as I said yesterday, that let's lean forward. Let's lean forward and let's take the side of our poor people and defend their interests and not continue with these corrupt practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honourable Senator Mike Temple from Swaziland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, thank you to His Excellency Thabo Mbeki for a very well-compiled report, Mr. President. The concerns I have, Mr. President, is, and are directed to us as Pan-African Parliament, I think we probably have about 700 reports sitting here and no action is taken. I agree IFF is totally unacceptable. The recommendations are good, are very good. But what do we do from here? Who are the recommendations directed to? Where do they go? What is the follow-up? Mr. President, track it, stop it, get it. How? How do we do that as a Pan-African Parliament? Or are we interested in doing that? The other issue, Mr. President, that hasn't been addressed here is IFFs happen going outside of Africa, but there are IFFs that happen within Africa. Transfer pricing, all those kinds of over-invoicing happens, and it destroys the smaller economies in Africa by the bigger economies. The multinationals do that. They take money from one smaller country to a larger country where their tax base is better, and that destroys the economies of the smaller countries. The other issue, Mr. President, is the influx of what we call so-called foreign investors that are sent here to set up businesses. The report talks about Hawala. There's Hawala and Rokra. These businesses are set up, and I refer to them as suicide funders. We have suicide bombers. I refer to them as suicide funders, Mr. President, where these businesses are set up to fund the very, very wars, the terrorist campaigns that are going on within Africa. And there we have to look at not the unbankable sector, the non-bankable sector, those that do not bank, not because they can't, but because they don't want to, because they know how to move their money within the country to set up these so-called campaigns. Finally, Mr. President, as the saying goes, we're all our brother's keeper, Mr. President. And I know there was a study done, by President Obasanjo from Nigeria with regards to the tax on non-beneficiated minerals going out of the country, out of the continent. I believe the report said it is not viable and not practical. I urge us as Pope, I urge His Excellency Thabo Mbeki to please relook at this, because we lose millions by exporting raw materials. There's nothing that is beneficiated to those raw materials. If there was some form of tax, we as a continent would benefit greatly from that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honourable Alexandra Barrow-Chamberlain from Gabon.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Honourable President. We are delighted and are proud of the report presented by President Thabo Mbeki, an illustrious son of our continent, and it shows to what extent, having served his country in a positive manner, one can serve Africa and continue being useful to the continent. And for that reason, he deserves our congratulations, and we are proud of him. And on the subject at hand, that is the illicit financial flows, we have received lots of information. And as far as we're concerned, it's important to consider strengthening the international architecture. And this depends on countries in the north, which need to be convinced of the usefulness of our actions, because where there are corrupt people, there are those that corrupt them. And we know that our banks are used at times to serve ends that we can all imagine. So then, how can we strengthen the architecture to ensure that we have the information that we need, so that these funds will be brought back, because we need them as we fight against poverty and as we try to develop our continent. Secondly, we need to strengthen political institutions by deepening democracy. We should put into place transparency rules and also to ensure that there is free flow of information. And in this regard, the Pan-African Parliament has a major role to play within the framework of the Charter. Another aspect I'd like to refer to here is the need to build capacity. This has been said. There's need to demonstrate strong political will, because I do not think that these improvements in governance will come from countries in the north. If we need first and foremost get to understand the effects, negative effects of illicit financial flows. And lastly, the role of the Pan-African Parliament should be to put into place regulations and model laws that will enable our countries to take on this challenge. We should have legislations that are appropriate for the task.
And I give the floor to the Honorable Bakari Ouattara from Côte d'Ivoire.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. I would like to commend President Thabo Mbeki for that clear presentation that has helped us to understand the issue of illicit financial flows. We might be locked into a vicious cycle because these illicit financial flows are generated by illegal trade at 70%, and then there's also drug trafficking and corruption. But at the same time, we say that fight these flows, we need cooperation between African countries and the foreign countries that receive these funds. Now, these countries that receive the funds get profit out of these flows, and it's a good source of revenue for those countries when you look at the tax or holidays. So, since they have been enriching themselves at our expense, how then can they accept to cede this source of income? To me, it looks like it's impossible. I think it's our fault, we African countries who are the sources of these flows. We need good governance in addition to capacity building. Honorable President, you give room to capacity building, but I think we should first of all promote political will. We should be beginning with good governance, because if the politicians are corrupt, then high-level experts can't do anything. So before we talk about high-level experts, in my humble opinion, we should see political will demonstrated to promote good governance, and then the experts will be able to do their work appropriately. Because we shouldn't forget, it's true that in our countries, even if we have limited capacities, there are some services that exist. But if these services are not free, or these people are not free to do their work, then they can't go far, because this will wasted time. I would like to conclude by saying that it's our fault. We need to see political will demonstrated. We need good governance supported with capacity building, and this would help us to fight this scourge of financial flows. And we shouldn't really bank on cooperation with countries that receive these funds. Thank you so much.
And I give the floor to the Honorable Alex Grant from Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also want to thank the former president of South Africa for this brilliant document. For me, it is my second time listening to him on this same issue when he visited sometimes 2013 in Liberia in our parliament, and he addressed the joint section of the Liberian parliament. This document is brilliant. The document is good. But I think what is lacking, I'm afraid that this becomes one of the best dust collectors somehow on our shelves again. Because we prepare very good documents on the continent, but realizing what we actually intend of these documents sometimes becomes difficult. Because the information remains up there, it doesn't filter down to our youth, doesn't filter down to even some of our professionals. If it is distributed among us as stakeholders or leaders of the country, sometimes it remains on the shelf for good. And if this information is not released to the public, to the young people, to the professionals, definitely we have a problem that we gather this information at our level and we see the same things happening over and over and again. Another aspect I try to also feature is the issue of our own consumers on the continent. We believe in foreign goods than those goods that are locally produced. So obviously we feel the international market, the cash comes, our corruption officers, they see this thing happening, they do not even prevent them. So consequently, our people, our continent, feel the blunt of this illegal financial flow out of the continent. So, distinguished colleagues, when these documents are produced to us and for our use, we should make sure at our own parliaments, see how these documents filter into our communities, how we filter them into our individual constituency. So by the end of the day, the information is available, then the local people, our local custom officers, anti-corruption officers are aware, and we can fight and combat this thing on the continent. Thank you, Mr. President, for this presentation and this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable McHenry Vinani from Namibia.
Thank you very much, Excellency President, the Presidium, Your Excellency President Thabo Mbeki. Let me from the onset say that since your departure from the political scene, the African voice has become shallow when engaging world powers of today, and it is regrettable that contemporary leaders have not followed in your footsteps to engage the world on key matters. Having said that, Your Excellency, I have three issues that I want to ask and to raise. One, I do not see the report raising the issue of illicit funds that belongs to our own African leaders, ministers, presidents, retired presidents abroad, or money that are stashed away, because I think that issue should not be left unattended, and perhaps the report could just shed light on what do we do and what is the veracity of these funds that are belonging to African leadership somewhere in safe havens across the globe. That's one. Two, the issue of transfer pricing is very paramount, because if you look at the fishing and mining industries of various countries, many multinationals are using this transfer pricing as a means of avoiding tax. But looking at the capacity that is lacking on the African continent, because these multinationals are employing highly trained, skilled experts to avoid these taxes. And at this point in time, we are saying a few countries in Africa are willing to help other countries. How soon can we combat this transfer pricing if we have to wait for other countries to help us? Because it's a serious concern, and multinationals have proven time and again that they are far ahead of African governments, employing highly skilled individuals around the globe to avoid tax. The two last issues that I want to raise is perhaps can the report also share the global level pictures in trading regimes across the globe. Africa is losing around about 50 billion US dollar. What is the trading regime in the East, for example, or Russia or Brazil is losing in illicit trade? For us to understand the veracity of these illicit outflows in the whole trading regimes globally. Lastly, the question of a lack of modern asymmetrical bilateral relations that are existing between Africa and current emerging multipolar powers of the world, such as China. Because I'm also seeing a trend on the continent.
Thank you very much, member. Thank you, appreciate it. And I give the floor to the Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lahai from Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the report is very telling, and I'm sure a lot of hard work has gone in producing this report. The report has clearly told us especially what are the factors and the drivers responsible for illicit financial flows. This is very important. But let me also add that another key factor, maybe that I didn't see in the report, is conflict. We countries that have come from conflict, that has been the entry point for most of these financial illicit flows. A country has gone from 11 years of war, you are in post-reconstruction, your economy is shattered, goods and services are needed, you are in a very weak position to negotiate. This is the time that most of these multinational companies come, and they require all sorts of incentives, all sorts of waivers, all sorts of preferential treatment. You want to open up your country to foreign direct investment, so the early bird syndrome is what this country uses, because once a multinational company has come once and twice, it gives confidence to other international organizations and investors to come. But yet we are weak and very in need of post-reconstruction resources. This is what Sierra Leone found itself in immediately after the war in 2002. We have a lot of mining companies that came. We wanted to come and stay. We wanted them to show that, yes, Sierra Leone is ready for investment. So there was a lot of concessions. It is only now that we are revisiting some of those concessions. So conflict is very important and a prime enabler of this sort of illicit flows. You have, of course, given us recommendations. For example, the setting up of institutions. The institutions you have mentioned in this report are already existing in most countries. Most countries have financial intelligence units. Most countries have anti-corruption. Most countries have revenue agencies and so forth. And yet, illicit flows are happening. The question is, are countries interacting? Are they talking? Where do we have most progressive mining agreements, business agreements? Where do we have most progressive tax incentives? So I think African countries, we must be talking. But of course, it takes two to tango. What about those that are outside there that are not within the remit of this? So this is a very good report, and we hope that we share this report. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And I give the floor to the Honorable Ndebo Akanda, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Thank you very much, President, for giving me the floor. At the outset, I would like to thank His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, who enlightened us and shared his wisdom through this sterling presentation made. President, I share the concerns raised by those who spoke before me, Madame Lahai, and I would like to insist, nevertheless, on
Je disais qu'il y a lieu d'insister, Monsieur le Président, sur la paix et la résolution des conflits pour lutter contre le flux financier illicite à partir de l'Afrique. Cependant, depuis des temps mémoriaux, les pères fondateurs de l'Afrique et du panafricanisme, Monsieur le Président.
Just for a moment, Honorable. Translation, please. English translation.
Is it working now, coming through?
Yes, yes.
Depuis le temps mémoriaux, disais-je,
Since time immemorial, as I said, President, the founding fathers of Africa and Pan-Africanism kept saying that the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer. And today it's the same message that we're listening to, but in different terms. And the question, and I'll conclude with this, very concretely speaking, what should we do, Mr. President, to devise a common integrated strategy in order to increase South-South relations and mitigate illicit financial flows? Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Aissata Kabir from Sierra Leone.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to the former president of this nation for this great presentation this morning. Mr. President, here in this parliament we say one Africa, one voice. Yet we know that we have more than 50 Africas and maybe over 10,000 voices. We find more ways to divide each other. We find more ways not to talk to each other. So we know for sure that the reality of a common African market is a far and distant reality. We don't know when and if a United States of Africa will ever be possible. Yet, as this great continent, we are more than willing to give up our sovereignty to former colonialists, but we shout sovereignty when it comes to ratifying and domesticating model African laws and protocols. We should be able to leverage on each other's strength to ensure that we don't continue to export our raw materials in their first stage. Value addition should now be a common goal for all African countries. We're not benefiting from these resources, yet other continents are benefiting from the resources. Only on this continent do we speak of our natural God-given blessings as a resource curse. Mr. President, the former president has already hinted at the fact that the 50 billion is actually a very conservative estimate. Other reports have alluded to $160 billion being lost annually if you include the losses due to trade. We export capital, and by so doing, we're exporting opportunities, we're exporting jobs, we're exporting capacity. There is not a lack of capacity of Africans. The problem is that African capacity does not reside in Africa. Those who are seeking greener pastures by drowning in Mediterranean seas are no different than those who are seeking greener pastures carrying their briefcases and being specialists and financial specialists in other continents. Our African brains are not working for Africa, they're working for somebody else. Mr. President, I believe that at this point, this report is very important, and it's more important than the report yesterday, which listed the number of conflicts on our continent, because this is the source of those conflicts. This loss of financial capacity is what's fueling the conflicts around our countries. If we address this issue, we'll be able to address the issue that we aired in this parliament yesterday. Finally, Mr. President, I'd like to ask the former president on one recommendation. This report is not new. Our leaders in the 60s and the 70s also talked about the illicit financial flow.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Gabriel Smith from Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me begin by thanking the one to whom I refer to as one of Africa's greatest, along with his illustrious team, for the level of profundity of thought and perspicacity of judgment that informed this report. I see the report as being emotionally soul-stirring, emotional in the sense that Africa, with the existing poverty we see, that while walking the corners of our villages and towns and cities, you see poverty approaching you from the facial expression of our people. And to know that Africa loses over 50 to 60 billion annually is troubling. But having said that, Mr. President, the question that comes back to us as African parliamentarians, specifically so belonging to the Pan-African Parliament, is what can we do? Because like it was clearly articulated by our sister from Sierra Leone, this is not a new something that Africa is discovering. It had been discovered in time past by our forebears that indeed Africa was being robbed. One of Africa's greatest writers wrote a book entitled How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And this is an extension of how Europe has underdeveloped Africa. But what have we done as leaders of Africa? I recall in 2013, we came here with this discourse about youth migration on the continent of Africa, yet our young people are dying in the Mediterranean, with nothing virtually being done by us as a continent. I believe that we must not rise up to the urgency of our time as leaders of Africa to ensure that at our respective parliaments, we cannot begin to institute laws and add laws that would be directed at value addition in ensuring that certain percentage of our natural resources are not just extracted and exported of our respective countries, but that they must be manufactured within to create the needed jobs and income for our people to reduce poverty on our continent. Until we do these, we will not come here and sound like a sounding samras, but we just listen to ourselves, talk here, and go back with no result. And Africa remain the same. I'd like to submit to you, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, that we of the Liberian delegation, when we left from here in 2013, we decided to work on the document. And today, in committee room, we now have a law being discussed as to how our resources can be improved in terms of value addition in our country. And we hope that other parliamentarians can do the same. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Senator Janet Ongera from Kenya. She's not here. And I'll give the floor to Honorable Ignatiana Niura Rukundo from Rwanda.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
Merci,
Honourable President. Thank you to the former South African President, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki. Yesterday, Mr. President, we were talking about Africa and conflicts. I have an idea. Africa should work preemptively. Why am I saying this? We should create a conducive environment to have confidence in our financial institutions within our respective countries. Because if the Africans do not deposit their money in their banks of their own countries, they will deposit it in other countries. And Africa won't have its own funds. And its funds will be elsewhere. So this needs to be done in Africa. This will enrich us in one way or another. Secondly, we should establish institutions. We talked about capacity building, but I think we have the capacity. Most of us have gone to university. Some of them went to the best universities in the world. So we have the people to manage, but we should increase the tax collection system as well as monitoring systems. I thank you.
And now we give the floor to the Honorable Senator Murkomen from Kenya. Stony Chamber. And I give the floor to the Honorable Janet Kabila from DRC Congo.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I would like to commend this report, and first of all, my congratulations goes to His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki for the engagement he's having to supporting the development of our African continent. I wouldn't pretend that I had time to read this report. It's 126 pages. I didn't have enough time, but I think I have a few issues I would like to share with you. That's according to my country. I see that we are on the last country, that is the farthest in achieving the Millennium Development Goals. We need 54 years to achieve it. It might be true, but I would say there are a lot of developments in my country. Recently, our head of state appointed a special advisor in charge of good governance, the fight against corruption, and also the financing of terrorism. This is a great step for us because we know we are on the right track, and as we say, charity begins at home. It's true that there's a lot of money going out of Africa, but the question is, who's taking it out? We are talking about corruption. There are givers of corruption and takers of corruption. We always talk about people who receive corruption. I think we should also talk about the people who give corruption, because many multinationals are doing that in our countries. The other thing I saw here, which lacked maybe in the report, is that we didn't talk about the money coming from outside, the aid money. How much percentage of that money does really go on the ground to support the needy people? It's less than 50%. So I really think we should look into this, because it's always said that our countries are getting aid from outside, but less than 50% goes to the people. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Zalikato Diallo from Guinea-Conakry.
Thank you very much, Honourable President. Let me start by paying a tribute in turn to His Excellency Thabo Mbeki for the sterling report that enabled us to point out the contours of the origins of the illicit financial flows. In my humble opinion, this report is a valuable tool for our leaders who would like to curtail this problem. $50 billion is the shortfall for Africa. This is significant. But given the complexity of this issue, I'm sure that this is only the tip of the iceberg, as those who are at the origin of these transactions have a great creativity. And that's why we need a crusade against this phenomenon. Never step back and believe that we're invincible. We should make sure that this capital can really serve the true economic development of Africa. And for this, we need political will, a firm political will with good governance. And regulations exist in most countries, but it's the enforcement of these rules that is not forthcoming. So we must set up controls on all levels if we want to come to terms with this issue. And those at the origin of illicit financial flows, well, we should remain vigilant, as they often use special flights. The customs services must be vigilant in the airports. The CEOs use special flights to transport these finances. We should also focus on the informal sector that is not included in the statistics. All of this needs to be reassessed. I thank you.
I will now give the floor to the Honorable Ibrahim Bello from Nigeria. Southern Chamber. I give the floor to the Honorable Joseph Mbandam from Cameroon. I give the floor to the Honorable Sineya Ahmed Na from Sahrawi Democratic Republic.
شكرا لأخ الرئيس. أريد في البداية أن أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل والعرفان للأخ الرئيس ثابو مبيكي.
We would like to thank His Excellency Thabo Mbeki for this sterling report. I am very thankful for the effort he had made for his country, South Africa. At the same time, I commend his role played in the betterment of our continent. And President, we see that what we are seeking is this what will help us to develop our continent and improve the lives of our people. Let me once again express our appreciation. We are very proud of him as former President of South Africa. And we once again thank him for everything he is doing to enable Africa to truly rise. This high-level panel he is heading, and this kind of report indeed represents the key and the way to bring about the renaissance of Africa in order to materialize our ambitions, to improve Africa. And this is the kind of effort that will put us on the right course, the way to a better future, to a renaissance. So once again, I thank the former president and congratulate him for this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Patrick Muchaleka from Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President. From the outset, let me congratulate President Thabo Mbeki for this report. The report indeed has raised a number of pertinent issues that are very key to Africa's development. The illicit financial flows in Africa has indeed contributed to high levels of poverty and inequality. And sadly, it's our women, the youth and children that bear the brunt. Unfortunately, Mr. President, there's a fundamental issue which I think the report does not address, and I would like to get your reaction. The question of leadership in Africa. Institutions are there. In various countries, in financial intelligence units have been set up, anti-corruption commissions, but these are institutions that are toothless. They have been undermined by our own leaders. When we're talking about corruption, when we're talking about large multinational companies, who do they collude with? When we're talking about transfer pricing, when we're talking about under-invoicing, who do they collude with? You find that most of these leaders in Africa are the ones who are creating these problems for us. Some of them are being sustained in power by these same institutions to a point where they are colluding, and sometimes even when it's time to go, some of them even refuse to go because they want to continue, and they are only sustained by these multinational companies. And these are the same leaders that are undermining these institutions. Because what we should be talking about, Mr. President, even in this report, is how do we address the challenge of leadership in Africa, a leadership that should be able to ensure that the institutions of governance are strengthened, the leadership that should ensure that we deepen good governance. Only then we will be able to ensure that the 50 billion that we require annually for our development will stay in Africa and can help us to deal with the challenges of poverty and inequality. So I want, Mr. President, for you to try and address this aspect of leadership and how this somehow relates to the challenges that you've pointed out in your report. I submit, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the Honorable Asmana Malam Issa from Niger.
Thank you very much, Honorable President. I agree with those for me in congratulating His Excellency Thabo Mbeki for his report. But I would like to congratulate him for already in 2012 having accepted to chair this high-level panel, because we need to admit that combating illicit financial flows or corruption in Africa is a formidable task. So we should encourage him, and I'm sure he is encouraged, and congratulate him for having taken up this fight. President, I chair the parliamentary network for the fight against corruption in my home country, Niger, and I had the honor of traveling to Accra in 2013 with President Thabo Mbeki, where we discussed this very same issue. And 6 months later, in May 2013, I was in Dakar, where we talked about the harmonization of the principles of disclosure of the assets by the African leaders. Now, these are issues that are interrelated, and they deal with the complex issue of combating corruption and illicit financial flows. President, I think we should move towards a greater understanding of what this high-level panel is doing, and that's why I have a list of questions I would like to ask His Excellency. I know in 2 years is a short time, but in these 2 years, have you made concrete actions in order to curtail these financial flows? If so, what actions have you undertaken? What are the results of these? Second concern I would like to raise: what is the relation that you draw between the illicit financial flows and terrorism? It is clear that as members of parliament and all the Africans in general, we do not understand where the terrorists get their funds, where do they get the money to arm them, to arm terrorists and sects. Is there a link between these two? Third concern I would like to raise: we couldn't read the entire report, but I would like to know whether there's a study that can enable us to understand who are the main actors of this financial flows to Europe. We can think of terrorists, but we also think that heads of state, African leaders, multinationals, those are the main actors. So Africa, even with this high-level panel, does Africa have the means to stem this tide? I'm not pessimistic, but I really say that this is a daunting task.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to Honorable Zakayo Cheriot from Kenya. Start in the chamber. And I give the floor to the Honorable Amzade Farah Menendez from Guinea-Bissau.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. First and foremost, I would like to
que deu o melhor de si e continua a dar. Que peçamos a Deus que os outros dirigentes africanos peguem esse mesmo caminho. Sr. Presidente, o assunto é tão complexo que, na verdade, exige.
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
Posso? O assunto é tão complexo que exige o próprio estudo.
Mr. President, this issue is so complex. That's why we need to study this document further.
Trabalho onde nós, todos os deputados que aqui estão,
This is a task for the African Union, and all the MPs from their respective countries need to look at this document in depth, as the statistics included in this report only, as colleagues said, is only the tip of the iceberg. Mr. President, we have identified the origin of these financial resources, but this document should also tell us what is the destination of these resources. If we know the destination of these financial flows, then we can bring the perpetrators to justice. If we know the origin and we know the destination, then we cannot remain complacent. Mr. President, some colleagues, when they express the link between conflict and illicit financial flows, we realize that there's a lot of money from our continent that is used to destabilize the continent. And it's on this issue that I say we should further study this document in depth. And other colleagues also said that some African presidents who cling to power contribute to this aspect of corruption and poor governance. Your Excellency, President Thabo Mbeki, it's an honor for us to have you here and that you chair this panel. And I know you're doing a difficult task, and you continue to raise awareness among our African leaders so that they can do better in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the Honorable Raquel Shebesh from Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start by acknowledging that I am very humbled to speak in the presence of the former President of the South African Republic, and to say to Mr. President that whatever work he does is taken very seriously in the African continent. He has a good track record of bringing Africa together, and the panel that he is heading, I'm sure, receives the respect it deserves. And that's why I will start with asking this very simple question, which my colleague from Zambia has also hinted to. My feel is that it is political goodwill that lacks. The reason why we have illicit financial flows is because the perpetrators of this kind of crime are protected by the political establishment. It is difficult for us to say this in our countries because the big boys club that controls most of the financial basis of the country are not more than 10 to 15% of the population. And they have continued to reap from our countries for many years, many since the time of colonization. And so how do we manage this? You have asked that Pan-African Parliament finds a place for it to be able to engage. Our place is becoming a legislative body, because if we are able to do the work that we do in our member states, we would take this very good report, instead of just having it here where we are just noting what has been said, we would take it back to our member state parliaments, we would table it on the floor of the House, we would get the relevant committees to look at it, we would then be able to play our oversight role and hold our governments to account. I say very clearly, without fear of contradiction, that I believe that if we had political goodwill, we would be able to stop the illicit financial flows that are continuing. So you say track it, stop it, get it. I think we can do the work of stopping so that no more funds go out, even as we track and get that has gone out. I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, chers collègues. Je donne la parole
Thank you, dear colleague. Honorable Abdou
Ndiaye
Ndiaye from Senegal has the floor now.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le
Thank you,
Président, chers collègues.
Honorable Chair. dear colleagues, first of all, I'd like to commend His Excellency Thabo Mbeki for the excellent presentation that he has made. Honourable President, towards the end of that presentation, the first reaction that I got was to ask myself, what should the Parliament do, considering what has just been said? What are the options available to us as an institution, that is the Parliament, that we should undertake on behalf of the people that we represent? So through such an approach, based on research and action, we shall be able to make our institution credible. Mr. President, as you know, all these challenges commit us. Our governments are committed, because if we are not properly elected, if we ignore the mission that is supposed to be ours, this then means that we will denature the organizational chart. And this is what has happened to Africa. So, in order not to go too far, and in regard to the solutions that have been suggested, His Excellency, the President has raised that we have a deficit of skills and that we do not have sufficient management mechanisms. So this means that we need a training setup to enable all the countries to harmonize their approach to handling and addressing the scourge of illicit financial flows. And I would like to draw your attention and also seek His Excellency Thabo Mbeki's opinion. If all those flows that have been deposited in African and European banks, what can we do with those flows? And what's the opinion? What should be done with those deposits that have been made abroad? What should we do to ensure that this money is brought back to Africa, to put it to use in our countries? So these are the actions that we need to consider, because these financial flows should stop, to ensure that African people can then use whatever resources are there at disposal to undertake government programs. Thank you, colleagues. Honorable Abdul Rahman Salim from Western Sahara has the floor. I'd like to express my congratulations and my gratitude to President Thabo Mbeki for always being available to serve Africa, and also commend him for the excellent report, which is detailed, that he has just been presented. Honorable President, for us to stop moving around in a vicious cycle, we need to undertake concrete measures at our August Assembly here in Parliament, but also with assistance from the Pan-African Union. And in this regard, there is one question that comes to mind. This question is addressed to all of us here. Can we take concrete measures by choosing one country or a regional group to begin the task of implementing the recommendations contained in this report? They are concrete resolutions, but what's lacking, as far as I'm concerned, is political will coming from our leaders. So I would like to suggest that we choose a country or simply a region of Africa that would be willing and ready to fight this scourge by implementing the recommendations in an exhaustive manner. And that would serve as a model and a starting point in fighting this challenge in Africa. So, and the second issue I'd like to raise is as follows. The previous speakers alluded to it. And in your opinion, Your Excellency, we as parliamentarians at the Pan-African Parliament, how can we contribute in the fight against these illicit financial flows? I think we need guidance and practical views so that we don't simply talk and do nothing. Thank you so much. I give the floor to Elijah Okupa of Uganda.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Allow me at this juncture to thank and congratulate the former President, Thabo Mbeki, for this very useful report. He is known for having spearheaded issues as far as we can regard the issues of NEPAD. He was the brain behind all this. We are today seeing him being the brain behind this document here. I want to personally, on behalf of Uganda, to thank and congratulate him for that. Mr. President, allow me to say, in the report we are citing issues of weak regulatory framework. But even in some countries, countries where we even have the regulatory framework. But the problem is, as stated in your findings, the issue of the political issue is a political issue, lack of political will. Even in the countries where we find we have all these laws in place, like the anti-corruption laws, the anti-money laundering laws, but where there is lack of political will, we are seeing this not being implemented because people want to continue being in power. They appoint these people in these positions. They ask them to defend them or make them inactive in implementing these regulatory laws. The other aspect also is we wait to see in the end the recommendations that you have made here. If there is political will, we shall be able to see the implementation of this. But my worry is, because of lack of political will, we are going to see this very good document just remain in the shelves. So how are we going to address the issue of political will? Because this political will is very important in having these issues addressed. So I don't know what you have to say on this matter, because we have seen also issues of good governance being eroded in this continent. Just 2 days ago, I was reading about some countries in Africa where they have resolved that they must now remove the term limits. So when we have such leaders, such governments in the power, how do you expect them to come to support this type of document? The other aspect is the role of the international community, because this money which is taken out of, laundered out of this country, goes to these European countries, American countries, the Swiss banks. They are the host of these banks here, but we have always had challenges in having this money returned. But even sometimes when this money is returned, it comes again back to the leadership in these countries where there is lack of political will to address, and it's trafficked or laundered again out of this country. So we want to see at the end that these very good recommendations that Your Excellency you have made here is implemented. We thank you for the good.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Honorable Professor Awad Ajay from Sudan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. I would like first to use this opportunity to express my thanks and to reflect the high appreciation of the people of Big Sudan, North and South, to the great effort of President Mbeki